Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Martin Sibley Show. We're back with another amazing guest today, Tanvi Vyas, MBE. We were just chatting before, but huge congratulations, Tanvi.
Thank you so much. It's really strange to actually have put that down in my little name box because it's the first time I've done so. It's the first time I've had the opportunity. So yeah, it's a surprise.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I'm looking forward to lots of different. Well, we've spent 20 minutes prepping and ended up talking about all sorts of interesting things already. There's a lot to get through. I suppose one thing was around the MBE. Like, is there anything around that, the kind of how it came to be, what you knew about it? I think having mentioned it up front, let's kind of share with the audience, like, what does it feel like to have an MBE and what actually happens behind the scenes as well?
Well, I only found out about 2 or 3 weeks before the announcement in the King's Birthday Honours, but I found out that it was for services to transport, which is an amazing privilege and honour because I think for me it's more to do with kind of it reflects on the people that I've worked with, the opportunities that I've been given, but also having access and inclusion somewhere on the radar when it comes to, services to the community has been amazing. But I still don't have any idea who nominated me, and I don't think I'm ever going to find out. I'll try and do a bit of digging, but
DM us
yeah,
if you did it or you know someone that did it.
yeah, I
Let us
know.
know.
Yeah, exactly. We might find out. But there will be an event, I think, at the palace, and I'll be given a medal. Apparently, there's an actual medal I get
So
given. So
that's not happened yet, that part
not
of
yet,
it.
not yet.
Got
No,
you, got you. Okay.
but in good time, and then maybe a little party. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was
Well,
incredible to,
it sounds like some of the juicy bits are to come as well then, right?
You never know. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So you've referenced transport, which I know that's been a big thing you've been working on and around more recently. I think for our own orientation and the listeners and the viewers, what we were saying before as well, we known each other well over a decade. And we both started out at this. Did you start at Disability Charity MD UK as your first job? Was that your first role?
It was my first job after university. So I've
Yeah.
had many jobs like ever since I was 16, I've worked in lots of random fields. Like the most random was probably I worked in Ladbrokes. I kind of was placing bets and things like that. But when it comes to access and inclusion and
Yeah.
it was my first job after university. I actually started off as a volunteer. It was the muscular dystrophy campaign at the time. And then I became campaigns assistant, campaigns officer, and then project manager there. But I'm still very much involved in the charity even now. So now it's known as
But and
MD.
already there's different narratives, right? Because you reminded me, I was like kind of work experiencey stuff when I was doing A levels and at uni. I worked at estate agent one summer, a leisure centre, a couple of years. So like not disability inclusion
Yeah,
oriented and
leisure
not,
centre. I've done a
yeah.
leisure centre too. Yeah, used to work at Aspire, which is an inclusive leisure centre in Stanmore. They have like an
Oh
accessible
yeah, I know that
and
one.
gym and that sort of thing. So that
Yeah.
it's not always, I feel as though that's what's quite great though. It's kind of like having those skills, being able to kind of transport them to different sections of different careers as well.
Yeah, I think back then we both were more in touch with those challenges we had transitioning from childhood to adult, basically going to uni, work experience, looking for that first job. And I know at that time, not only were we experiencing it, but the work we did was about sharing those stories and connecting with other people that were having similar challenges and sharing solutions. And obviously where we're at a good 15 years later, almost, I think now, maybe 13, 12, something like that. We're obviously, as you sort of referenced when we were chatting before, we're more in the room where the bigger societal decisions get made. And that we'll kind of work back up to that in a minute. But it's just nice remembering like that kind of reality that we were going through and that more, I suppose, like that campaigning activist sort of side that we were doing a lot of back then. But yeah, so I was at Scope in a few different roles. You were at MDC, as it was called then, now MD UK. And we did some TV stuff we did and general campaign and stuff we did. But yeah, I guess sort of from that, like what did that job, what was the value? Obviously it gave you money. We all get we
Yeah.
need the income to live off, quite simply around that. But like when you look back, what did that mean as part of your journey to where you've got to now? What did you enjoy about that role? What was challenging as well?
Oh, Martin, that is actually such a difficult question because in a way, I would say when I joined MDUK, it was one of the best things I ever did
Yeah,
because the opportunities that I got given from such an early stage, just volunteering and then working and getting to meet so many different amazing, incredible people, like young disabled people, older disabled people. I think one of the first things that I did, which was kind of outside the office itself, was interview the Minister for Transport at the time, who was Sadiq Khan. And we
oh
went to
wow.
Nottingham. We ended up kind of on a bus and chatting.
Apparently he went on to do some quite good things
I,
afterwards.
I don't know, I think so, something like that. And then yeah, it was the reason why I just loved the role was because I got to meet other young disabled people. When I was growing up, I kind of didn't really get involved in charities or networks.
Yeah,
I
same.
first met disabled people with similar conditions to me at university, and then I realized that I wasn't alone in the things that I was kind of going through,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I was facing. We didn't have that much kind of social media growing up. We didn't have a way of kind of connecting with people across the country or even internationally. So in
yeah,
some ways, like the bubbles were that small, much smaller, like the
yeah,
circles were that much smaller. So sometimes I'd be thinking, oh, I'm the only person feeling like this or facing this barrier, or kind of having people have sort of, strange, unusual attitudes towards me, just being,
yeah,
awkward around me being in a wheelchair. And then once I found out about kind of what other people were going through and realizing that we've got so many things in common, although we're absolute individuals with all of our own kind of experiences and emotions, there's so much that we've got shared experiences, and like we were stronger, genuinely felt that we were stronger together, coming together with a kind of one voice and kind of being able to raise that in lots of different spheres. So kind of we started off with kind of report writing. We raised awareness through journalists, but then we also started the all-party parliamentary group for young
yeah,
disabled people. And I know there are different versions of all-party parliamentary groups now, but it was just a really great way to raise the profile of social injustices that
yeah,
face, but in a really constructive way. So it was kind of like, we had the idea of sharing those experiences, but in a way where other people kind of understood, empathized rather than sympathized and felt sorry for people. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was very groundbreaking and innovative at the time, and I think it's interesting how you say social media didn't exist or was very new when we were in that kind of mid noughties time.
Yeah.
And I think like even the APPGs, well, I'm not aware of ever if they did or didn't exist in general for long before that, but it was certainly for around disability was very innovative. So yeah, and then you sort of jump to now, and then social media is everywhere, and there seems to be an APPG for all sorts of things. And so then you have to find new strategies, new tools, new tactics to kind of break through and continue that. So from that role at, we'll say MDUK
Yeah.
as they're now called, I mean, and take as long or as quick as is necessary, but how does that sort of, how long did you work there for? And like bringing us up to now, like what were there lots of different roles you did, or was it a kind of direct jump to what you do now? But it'd just be good to hear a bit more about that journey.
Yeah, so for me, I worked with MDUK until 2016.
Yeah,
And then I became a trustee for MDUK, and now I'm a vice president for the charity. So I'm still very much involved in what they do.
VP, very nice.
Yeah, so they don't have Trailblazers anymore, unfortunately, but it's moved to WizKids, who are responsible now for what they want to do with it in the future. But for me, I'd say within the role, I'd say because I did, as I mentioned, I was kind of project assistant, officer, and then project manager. And for me, it was more to do with kind of developing skills, but also I managed some really amazing disabled people and non-disabled people as well, just
Yeah,
in terms of that for my kind of outlook and building up my skills, but also supporting others. And I liked the idea of me kind of being a volunteer and having kind of gone through the different stages and gone like climbed the ropes, as it were, and then be able to share things with others and just kind of get them to build their confidence and skills. And also
yeah,
I just feel as though I got to meet people who were kind of ambassadors in different regions, and I'm still in touch with a lot of them, and people have gone on to do such amazing, incredible things, and they're so skilled and talented. And it's not just kind of access and inclusion related, it's kind of in like wonderful, amazing kind of different professions like artists, creators,
yeah.
people who are like in marketing, all sorts of things. So yeah, that's what's great. And now I guess in terms of like where I am now, I'm now a freelance disability equality consultant and trainer. So I worked for myself. And for me, it was almost, I wanted to do that because I felt as though I did like having structure in a role. But for me, as my kind of condition is different, and I just feel as though I prefer having a flexible working environment where I'm kind of working for myself. And although I do like a bit of structure, it's where I can kind of decide where and when I spend my energy and how I spend my energy. And now I'm always going for that kind of work-life balance. But for me, it's kind of deciding that I want to kind of put my energy in really specific projects that mean a lot to me, which makes it authentic longer term.
And maybe this is a loaded question from my personal experience, but have you found that the balance is kind of in seasons rather than a day or a week is perfectly balanced? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes, and it's not a loaded question at all because I feel as though it's something that we all strive towards, especially with, I mean, I've got some good days, some not so good days, but I know that I'm finding my jam now, and it's
Yeah,
taken this amount of time. So, like 7 or 8 years, I've now been freelance, and I'm now finding that I can say, you know what, this is something that's really important to me. I want to make sure I want to put my time and effort into this, and I can see real change happening. I want to put kind of my focus into projects and with clients that I see change happening with. And also like sometimes you do have to sow seeds as well. And it's like it's working constructively with lots of different people and with a different client base as well. So
well, also it's every year we're all learning new things and gaining new ideas. And I guess if you look at just kind of the labor market and pure economics, as people like you and I have been working over time, you become more valuable because there is an experience that just has higher value to clients, and also that kind of brand of, and individuals, we have brands whether we like it or not, in terms of people just get to know about you and word of mouth, and if you spoke to Tanvi, you should get her involved on this project. So I think, like in a way it takes that time to figure it out, not only on that consideration we do have of having spinal muscular atrophy or similar condition, but it's also just the world and the labour market becoming more aware of who we are and what we bring being of value and benefit to them as well.
oh, definitely. And I think it's a bit of both really, because I think for me, since the pandemic, of course, it was an absolutely awful time, but we all adapted and we found different ways to evolve and change, and like being able to work from home sometimes, being able to do lots more online, being able to connect in different parts of the world at different times of the day. All of that things, there had to have been a silver lining with such an atrocity. So you almost feel as though it's been a really great way to bring in lots of different voices and at different times.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll come in a second to some of the projects you've been involved in lately since you've been freelance, and kind of what, when you say transport, be good to unpick a bit more of which types of transport as well, what barriers as well. But we were going to give that little hat tip, that little acknowledgement to what we have in the background to turn up and do the work that we do. And I know we're both quite, it's not always shy of talking about it, but it's like not always necessary to speak to that. But I do think to the kind of younger generation, it's nice to hear from people like us of how what does go on in the background to a degree. But I think even for mainstream society, even the clients we work with, just to sometimes have that little bit of empathy around, it's not like we just wake up and hop out of bed, like there's stuff going on. But like anything you care to share, I think it's nice to just that little hat tip, as I said, to that.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, because with social media and the way that kind of, Instagram works or X or even like podcasts, sometimes we only see this final product and you don't necessarily know what's happening behind the scenes and everything that's had to go on beforehand, like having support out there, like my husband, Dan, we've been married for 12 years now, which is amazing. And like my carers, it's just there's lots that goes on in the background before someone can get to a computer screen or get to deliver training somewhere. And it's just, I feel as though it's really important to just value people and kind of say, well, you know what, this didn't just happen. It's not like even just getting this the MBE, it feels as though I'm not going to like drop it into conversation, but actually there just needs to be recognition that this is because of everything else that goes on behind the scenes and all the support that people do need and sometimes really do struggle to get. And so it's understanding that privilege as well in that way.
Yeah, and maybe as disabled people, we well, as we know, everyone's different, every experience is different, but you and I are similar where, you know, it's that kind of vehement wish to be independent and make our own decisions, which I believe is the correct way to be. I'm not questioning that whatsoever, but I don't know, it's almost like if you take it out of the disability element or context, and I was just sort of thinking about like the Oscars, and when someone wins the award, they thank their teachers, their family, their friends, and I'm not saying we're now winning Oscars, but
I
like,
was about to say I can't ever compare it to that, but
well,
yeah.
NVE is pretty bloody cool, by the way, Tanvi. That is up there. But like, but even when it's a 20-year-old and they've achieved going to uni, I think having gratitude is what we're talking
Yeah.
about, really. Like we all need other people, whether we're disabled or not. And I do sometimes wonder, maybe reflecting back just on myself, that desire to be so independent, inverted commas, we can overlook that it's fine to sometimes have help from others and not maybe resent that. And I'm thinking more younger me than
Yeah.
older me. But I think there were times where a bit of me resented needing that help because I wished I could have just done it myself. But that is our life and that is our situation. But to acknowledge the people that help us, I think is a great thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, one of my good friends, Suleiman Khan,
Yes.
he talks about interdependence, and it's something that
Yes.
a new concept to me. And I feel as though it's okay that actually you're not being fiercely independent. I loved the idea of me being able to do as much as I can, as independently as I can, and be seen to be thriving in that way. But actually, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we are interdependent on lots of
Yes.
others, and how actually that's actually it's a strength to actually acknowledge that and be grateful for that as well.
Yeah.
So
We're
absolutely.
going deep now, as we tend to
Yeah.
do anyway. But I had, again, I've spoke about it quite openly, but there was a couple of years ago a bit of a health dip and a bit of a burnout, and I'd just been, all my days were about growing Purple Goat, and it became almost sort of like that my identity and Purple Goat identity became one, and that sort of does happen when you start something new. You have to give it your all because there isn't a team and all that kind of stuff. But one way or another, I overdid it a bit, shall we say? And with the context of the pandemic and the lockdowns, it was a bit of a perfect storm. But I was made to sit more still. I've always been, heading off to different countries, different work things, and a lot. And Suleiman and I have connected on this quite a lot. But I definitely started to consume different inputs, not that sort of bro hustle culture,
Yeah.
but like actually there are very natural rhythms that we all have. As though we're going deep here, but like, and then maybe it's because we both sort of said we're not going to give our age away, but we've been doing it a while.
You can work
I
out the
think,
maths.
yeah, but I think everyone does get to that maturity and you see things a bit different. And I know, like, seeing the natural rhythms my body has, and that point around interdependence that you just referenced, Suleiman, like, there's some really interesting books and podcasts and other philosophies almost that have been quite empowering as a disabled person and just as a person. And I think it feels like a lot more people are getting into those sort of topics and realizing it's not just about, the next success, the next achievement, but it is around like community and being in service to something bigger than ourselves and all that. So I'll try not to go on a soapbox now, but these all feel very alive for me the last year or so.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? So much of what you've just said, like, kind of resonates, but also just makes me think back to when times when you have been kind of pushed, when I've been pushing myself and I've been kind
Yeah,
of thinking, you know what? You have to adapt, you have to thrive, you have to hustle. We have to kind of, I always wanted to give my 110%, not even just
yeah,
100%. And I feel that some of that is within my nature. But then sometimes your body is going to tell you what it needs and when it needs it. And
yeah,
so sometimes you have to listen to that and realize that, first of all, how do we even define what success is? It's
yeah,
like, what are the parameters? What are we using for those indicators? And I realize I've had time to kind of think to myself, what makes me happy? How do I view success? And that
yeah,
to me is actually having that kind of thinking of that sense of well-being, thinking about acknowledging the people around me, the people that you care about, and kind of wanting to give that out to more and more people, and share kind of some of the good things that can happen with individuals too.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head with the word in your nature. So none of this is to be saying to someone that does work 15 hours and they're up at 5 a.m. If that's in their nature, awesome. Like, it's not to criticize those people, it's more to say that everyone should be doing that, even when it's not in their nature. That's the bit I think we need to find a little bit more balance around those kind of content and discussions and everything. So, yeah,
Yeah. And also kind of realizing what your body's rhythm is. It may be
exactly.
different, and realizing it's not necessarily going to be the same thing every day. So like it's
No,
nothing is static, and realizing we can of course still adapt and change, but working out what works best for us on any given day.
yeah,
So.
yeah, no, I totally agree. So bringing us back to transport and work, and I mean all that stuff we just said is so important for whatever people are up to. Like it really is so important for that sustainability of career and work and non-work life. But yeah, so to bring it back to kind of current clients, current projects, like what are some of the things you've been working on, clients, like what are the challenges out there at the moment with transport? What are some of the solutions you're finding?
So that's, again, transport's a really big subject, but
It's huge, isn't
if I
it?
go into that, I was just going to say that I find that thinking about that kind of idea of things correlating and joining up transport, for me, the reason I found it so interesting, even like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but even going back 10 years ago, for accessibility and inclusion, transport joins everything up. It's almost like the artery that allows us to go out and live our lives. And
Yeah,
it sounds like a bit of a big statement to make, but being able to have accessible and an inclusive transport network can actually change people's lives, because your world gets that much bigger. So thinking about kind of where you might work, where you might travel to for fun, leisure, like going out with friends, because I live in Zone 5 in London, so I can kind of get into London quite easily, but I actually decided where we were going to live based on transport networks and transport links. It has such a huge impact on
yeah,
what we might do with our days and what we might do in the future as well. So like transport just generally kind of on a local level as well as a sort of international levels always been something that I've cared about, because I just feel that if we can use it in a way which is as independent as possible, we can kind of make the most of our lives, really. So like, for me, I'd say in the last few years, so I used to be on DIPTAC, which is the Department for Transport's committee. It's a non-executive committee, so that's Disabled People's Transport Advisory Committee, where
yeah,
we are very much government advisors. So it's quite kind of inward facing, and we're kind of we can be critical friends, but we're very much kind of we want to make sure that the government can trust us. We're their advisors in that way. So within that, I was leading. So I was leading on the aviation and maritime subgroup there, but I was also involved in kind of the rail subgroup, the local travel, and also personal mobility. So it's kind of like very wide range.
yeah,
But that, like, for me, transport, I'll get too kind of geeky in this, but policy and the kind of the regulations and that side of stuff, although it might be really boring for some people, it's almost where that should be like the baseline of what people
yeah,
need to do
yeah,
to make things more accessible. And if we don't have that to begin with, then it's almost like a little bit of a free for all. It's kind of like, where, oh, are we just doing this because it's a nice thing to do? Is it just a nice thing to help disabled people? Actually, it's our right to be able to access transport and access different facilities, just like anyone else does. And we need a little bit of guidance, and they need a bit of kind of minimum regulations. They need that so that they're able to at least work from that as a baseline. But that's where we need to make sure that they're getting that right in the first place. So for me, I'd say I'm on a number of different kind of boards and panels now, but I'd say it's about kind of being able to influence change, but also just raise certain kind of raise information about barriers and maybe things that were unintended consequences that people haven't necessarily considered. The other thing that I do is I deliver training, so disability equality training, not
yeah,
just in the transport sector, but quite a lot in the transport sector. Again, it could be frontline, it could be kind of management, it could be, again, working out ways of looking internally at keeping employees or colleagues or team members if people acquire an impairment. So
mhm,
it's quite kind of wide ranging in that way. But for me, it's any mode of transport in terms of the intermodal part as well. We can't just focus on one thing separately. There's always kind of overlaps in that way as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's nice variety. Like no day, I'd imagine is the same. But at the same time, it's all basically helping to build and create a more inclusive world. And I think we're literally as we're recording about a week away from the new government, the Labour Party becoming the government, and a lot of their rhetoric in the manifesto and the campaigning that led to their landslide win was this sort of idea of wealth creation and growth, because without a strong economy, a lot of other things are hard to fix for all sorts of different economic and political reasons. And it struck me when looking and listening at all of those conversations is like there's this big thing being going on about disabled people getting into work more. And to your point, and you referenced it earlier, but I think it's important to kind of double down on it, is like you can't have a general country that can flourish when it's hard to move around. And when we know there are more barriers having a disability, particularly in transport, that's like a double thing, isn't it? That if you fix those transport barriers, those issues, you unlock so much more potential of disabled people. And we both know as well, like it's not the only thing of if disabled people aren't in work, then that's all rubbish. Like we get the nuances that some people can't work and they should be 100% looked after regardless and supported regardless. But I think there are a lot of disabled people that want to work, can work, but things like transport make it way harder, if not impossible. And so I can imagine there's an opportunity more than ever now in fixing some of the transport things. That's a big part of unlocking this prosperity and wealth in the country as well.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I guess this is a thing because I'm kind of very used to being quite kind of politically neutral because of different roles and things like that. But I
Yeah,
think for me, regardless of who is in power, I'd say that right now is a really exciting time. Well, I'd want to watch this space because there's the idea of kind of social mobility as well as looking at inequality in different parts of the country. Because quite often we kind of get centralized, funding around metropolitan areas where there are cities. And one of my friends I remember said to me because I live near London, like I mentioned, someone said, "Oh, you've got the moon on a stick in London. You don't even realize, we get buses every like 8 minutes, and then you go slightly further out into Hertfordshire, and they're every half an hour, and you go further, and it's every hour, and then there's still just that kind of one wheelchair space. So if we want to get people out into work or going out and about and be, and having an inclusive society, then surely when it comes to even looking at like the modeling, if we've got two spaces on a train and one on a bus, it doesn't quite kind of work out if we're all supposed to be getting to work at the same time. But the other thing is, which I think is almost dangerous, is that the assumption that we all want to work from home and that it's just where it's.
Well, that's the other side of this.
Yeah, we need to just make sure we're bringing the best skills, like the best skills and talent, and that might be in-house, it might be at home, it might be a combination of both, but not making people feel as though, oh well, I need to do this and I must do this from home. It's kind of like that we need to make sure that we're acknowledging the different barriers that different people are going to face, and it's never like that one size fits all to kind of say, oh well, I know this person in a wheelchair and they were fine with that. So it's and thinking kind of further, like thinking a bit further into, it's not just kind of mobility impairments. We've got, it's 1 in 5 people in the UK, and there are so many people with like non-visible or less visible impairments that are acquiring stuff. So I'd say for me, when it comes to that transport side of things, it definitely links, it brings more people to the forefront of people's minds. If we're visible and we're there, then if it's kind of silly when you say, oh well, there aren't really that many people that are looking for work in the first place. But there are the two sides of it. It's kind of like we might want to work, but actually are employers and our clients ready to kind of make sure that we can embrace that inclusion and make sure that, again, there are like there could be kind of there are people who might consider employing someone who's disabled, but not necessarily feel confident in what kind of adjustments people might need. So having those conversations in the way, because there is no denying that there is still a lot of awkwardness around employing disabled people, or otherwise just the lack of knowledge. And it might not be intentional, but it might just be, oh well, I'm not too sure how to do this, so I'd rather give it a go.
I mean, you and I have had the nostalgia and the looking back at when we first met, breaking into song here now, but on our perspective. But the kind of what you spoke to there is sometimes it's a little bit scary, if not frustrating, how certain views and narratives in the public and employers don't feel that much better in like 10 years or more. Like there is things that get better and there is progress, and so I'm not trying to paint an overly only negative picture. There are positives, but there are also some still very strange views around disability. I mean, I don't know if you saw, I did a video about hailing a cab on an app. Did you see that online at all?
I've seen that. I haven't seen that one particularly, but I have seen some
Yeah.
things like that. And where was it kind of where you let them know that you were a wheelchair user, and then suddenly it's
Well, they turned up and it was the app was free now, and
yeah,
most, as you know, black cabs are wheelchair accessible. But this particular black cab that happened to be hailed by the app wasn't tall enough for me in my wheelchair, which
okay.
has happened occasionally, but it's not often. The difficulty or the challenge I had was I cancelled the ride because I couldn't get in it, but I got charged
Got
by
charged.
the.
Oh, I did see that, and that was quite recent, wasn't it? It
So
was
that
yeah,
went
yeah,
viral, and
yeah,
beyond the app, who I'm now talking to, it definitely wasn't the driver or the vehicle itself's fault, like it
yeah.
has feelings, but
But it wasn't your fault either. So
right, all of that stuff. But
yeah,
the some of the comments were like, whoa, like people's view about almost like I should just stay home and like I get government benefit, and they don't know me, they don't know anything about my real life situation. But yeah, so I just wanted to speak to that quickly because yeah,
yeah.
some attitudes are not better, and maybe where we've had quite a political or culture war, shall we say, the last few years, there are some people that are a bit more out there negatively in the views on disability, and that is a bit, yeah, it's a bit sad to say that. But obviously we keep going, we keep plodding away, and we will chip away and get there in the end, I'm sure.
It's you know what, it just really brings back a memory for me. I put a reel out at the beginning, I think it was around Christmas time, and it has got a ridiculous number of views, but it's I was driving from my wheelchair, and again it's almost like, you know, the things that you kind of think, oh, these are thoughts that must be just in my head. It's like all of that internalized ableism.
Yeah,
People are out there because it's quite anonymous saying all of these things, so you know,
yeah,
it's all of these ideas of, oh, you get this for free and you should be
yeah,
grateful, and I it's almost like that narrative almost been pushed underground, so
yeah,
it's still very much there, but it's where it shouldn't, it's a power dynamic where people shouldn't be kind of thinking, oh well, you should be grateful for absolutely anything. Actually, it's a justice. It's that idea of we have an inherent value just like everyone else does, and we
yeah,
need to make sure that we're doing what we can to build constructive arguments as to why and how we're going to
yeah.
get there to level that playing field, because otherwise it's almost like it shouldn't be like a gratitude thing. It's kind
No,
of we could get a cab just like everyone else. And I'm very excited that well, it was about a year ago now, and I met one of the people that had insisted that every black cab would have be accessible kind of in the
yeah,
70s.
yeah.
And it was where it was a choice of saying, oh well, can it be a sort of opt-in mechanism? And they thought if we did that,
They were
then
off down.
it wouldn't have happened. So
Yeah,
I feel like black cabs are definitely that kind of link up when it comes when other parts of transport does fail. It kind of
yeah,
bridges that gap in that way. But
yeah.
I find yeah, I still have to sometimes pretend I'm not with my husband Dan, who's not disabled, who sometimes doesn't look like he's with me. So he's there hailing the cab, and I jump out and go, hello, it's me.
Hey,
Yeah,
surprise!
but although we make that a comical, like it's almost,
Yeah,
oh, you
it's
have to, it's
ridiculous,
almost like
isn't it?
it's absolutely, it's, yeah, it's infuriating because the fact that we need to do that to this day in 2024,
I
I
know.
mean, things are definitely getting better, but
Yeah,
oh, it's always like, oh, well, they won't quite see me if I'm hailing that cab. And I do tend to go to taxi ranks because it's just easier to make sure that you're in a queue and it's kind of more structured in that way. But it shouldn't be the case, and there should
no.
be more avenues for redress as well. So for me, it's also that idea of like the consumer angle, because
Mm,
actually we are paying people. We're
yeah.
paying the same amount of money as everyone
Yeah.
else would for that black
And
cab.
citizens, right? Humans and all that good stuff as well.
Exactly. So it's all of it together, and it's where
Yeah,
we do need to understand why we're doing this, and it's not just a nice thing to do. There are so
yeah,
many other things for
yeah,
it. But yeah, I'd say when it comes to all sorts of transport, it's very frustrating sometimes because it feels as though, you know, we're making progress, and then there might be a change of leadership, or there might be a change of management or culture within different organizations, or that there might be a different focus in a sector, let's say.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then it feels as though we need to kind of get into the room and start again, but it shouldn't be the case. And I think it's just important that we don't get complacent, because I know that we know that things have improved, going back 20, 30 years, things are totally different, and what people had to campaign for, and how people got into the room. But also it's that shock factor as well. So you kind of need also lots and lots of different people. It takes all sorts of individuals to raise the profile of injustices in different ways, but also get into the room with decision makers and actually say, look, this is what makes sense and this is why it makes sense, and it's going to be better for everyone. And also, when we make things better for disabled people, quite often it makes things a lot better for everyone else, and it makes the world a bit more accessible and inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think I'm mindful of the time, need to head off in a little while. That feels like an astounding way to end the chat, really. I always do the kind of, what's the future look like? What final thoughts have you got? But I think you kind of smashed it on what you just said before. Is there anything else you still would like to mention before we wrap?
I guess the only thing I would say is that I really think it's great that we do raise the profile of things in different spheres. So, we've got social media, we're in rooms, we get to work with people on an everyday basis quite often. But I think it's really important that we don't work in kind of silos, and we're kind of to people who already know about what the challenges are. I think just opening that up and making sure that we can kind of get allies involved, get people who might not be disabled, who might not even not know or not necessarily think they know disabled people. It's just where this is the right thing to do. We need to make the world that much more accessible and think creatively. And also doing this at an early stage in projects, or when there's budget, is just so much better, because it just makes things better. Well, the frustration when something's already come to fruition and then it's kind of gone with minimum compliance, but it's still not necessarily as accessible as it could be. That for me is, that's it.
The one that jumps to mind there is hotel rooms. It's like that, there are more accessible rooms, inverted commas, like you say, than 20, 30 years ago. But they all have these really little frustrating things that aren't quite right for us. And like you said, there's different disabilities. So obviously, it's not to say that everyone has the same needs that you or I do, but thousands of people are very similar to you and I. And I'm speaking to like hoist and that kind of stuff. And it's just rubbish, quite frankly, how few hotels do. So yeah, that just spoke to your point of minimum compliance, but not maximum customer satisfaction.
Yeah. And the usability. But for me, it's also information, and that's how powerful information is in advance. Because if you know, then you can plan, and then you can bring the relevant things that you might need to. But also just being able to book things online, like we almost feel as though that should be the norm now. It shouldn't necessarily be a nice to have, because everyone else is able to book things online, and it's not that much more difficult to put it into the operational side of stuff. So if that can be considered as well. Anyway, I feel like we're carried on, but yeah.
No, it's cool. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, there's, as we said, a lot of disabled people in the world, like 1.3 billion people with different lived experiences, conditions, socio-economic perspectives. So you've got a lot of variables in the community. You've got the sort of sharing stories and campaigning for change part. Then you've got the businesses, the governments, even the charities. And as you say, we as a community are more in the room than we've ever used to be, I think. And don't get me wrong, the people in the 80s and 90s barged their way in the room. Like, we're probably more invited in the room now. But I just want to, again, hat tip to the OG activists that had to really push. But yeah, like you said, a lot of things are better. But I think you're right. It's how not to be in silos is almost the next wave of how we get more traction and more inclusion, really.
Yeah, and keeping it on the radar, making sure that it's always going to be a fundamental, it's baked into strategies, because otherwise, if we're kind of thinking, it should be done, it's it's something that should happen, but then we're not necessarily keeping it in the forefront of people's minds, it could slip down. So
Agreed. And I was going to also say, there's so much more we could speak, just aeroplanes as one topic, or you mentioned other, trains, other forms of transport. But there's a lot we could cover, but I think we've got a good overview. And most of all, congratulations again with your MBE and the general change that you're making, which is what the MBA is reflecting, that your input and impact is making a difference for everyone. So thank you for today, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Martin, for inviting me. It's been really great.
Pleasure. See you soon.